Okay. So please unmute if you want to talk now.
Okay. Okay,
Ioannis?
I would like to start. Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, yes. Thanks very much. Once again, I myself and Violeta would like to thank all of you for your participation in our colloquia. Today, meeting refers to two speakers. One comes from the arts and the other from the science. Livia Teodorescu, CIOCANEA, is a Romanian composer, is the first speaker, and then Anastasios BOUNTIS is our next speaker. I see here we have with us always the support with presence of the president of our academy, Professor Klaus Mainzer. I would like to invite Klaus to give a greeting, to this meeting as well.
He has to be unmuted.
Please unmute, yeah.
Klaus
Yeah,
Mainzer.
thank you. And
Okay.
I'm delighted about your activities because that seems to be a very successful lecture series concerning science and arts. Perhaps you know, last Saturday, we had also an activity in this direction. It was also organized by Violeta Dinescu as Dean of Class 3 of Arts, together with Dean Önnerfors from Class 1 Humanities, and our Vice President, Birgit Harris, at the occasion of the 200th birthday of Dostoevsky. And now perhaps you know, we also have these topic networks with the expert groups. They are also working across the disciplines and classes. So there are a lot of activities now in the academy in spite of Corona. Perhaps you know, in Austria, it is really terrible. With this weekend, we have a total lockdown, especially in Salzburg. And so the academy, at least in the next weeks, can only work in home office. And nevertheless, all our activities, due to the virtual new media, are perhaps more active than in the past, when there were only physical presence activities. And so I think nevertheless we can enjoy these kind of activities. Thank you.
Thank you. Violeta.
Thank you very much. I would like to present our first speaker, Livia Teodorescu Ciocănea. She is a composer from Romania, as Ioannis also told us, and also pianist. She is a professor of composition at the National University of Music in Bucharest. And she has also been art director of the Bucharest National Opera. She has composed over 80 works, including Archimedes Symphony, Le Rouge et le Noir ballet, and the opera after Chekhov, The Lady with the Dog. Her music has been performed in her country and also in all over the world, Europe, Asia, America, by famous musicians and also major orchestras. Livia Teodorescu Ciocănea received numerous awards and prizes for her music. In 2008, she received the famous National Cultural Merit Knight grade. I'm very happy to invite Livia Teodorescu to present us her music.
Please unmute.
Unmute it, yes.
She can unmute herself.
Okay, I did, yeah. Thank you, Violeta, for the presentation. Thank you for attending this symposium. I will speak very quick to be in time. My topic is poetics of hypertimbralism in music. I already did my share is not working. I don't know why. Okay. My presentation is an attempt to introduce and clarify an original concept which I called hypertimbralism, that refers to music based on hypertimbre as a foundation for musical composition. It points to either orchestral, chamber or solo instruments music relying on unusual timbre involving polyspectral energy. In contemporary music, two factors led to the arousal of timbre-based aesthetics: sound mass, namely very dense textures, and extended instrumental techniques. In my view, hypertimbralism embraces already written music and at the same time opens imagination for new insights in this matter. A poetics of hypertimbralism would provide a musicological background for composition based on an enhanced vocabulary of timbre and on a higher understanding of timbre perception. The three nouns in the title are each difficult to define, even more so in this unusual combination. Poetics will suggest Aristotle. Hypertimbralism could send to hyperspace or hypertext, and the music could be seen as the highest metaphor of thinking. I will try to present and argue an aesthetic vision based on these bricks of thought. The concept of poetics has multiple meanings, from a set of rules that underlie the creation of an artistic work to the highest expression of human thought involving pure emotionality, that is poetry. Aristotle wrote of epic poetry, the poetry of tragedy, comedy, and the poetry of playing the flute or harp. Aristotle also stated that life presents and art represents, a kind of mirroring being involved in art. We call mimesis. We enjoy likeness when we could refer to the original. Aristotle adds that we have a natural instinct for representation and for tune and rhythm. But when no imitation is depicted by the receiver, not knowing the original, he or she will simply enjoy technique or color or other such elements. I am emphasizing the modernity and topicality of this last statement of Aristotle, which announced, in my opinion, the change brought by modernity, non-referentiality and concentration on the very elements of language. In music, starting with the 20th century, some tendencies were to eliminate extra-musical references, emotionality, narrativity, and drama, revealing pure structure and processes, treating notes as pure sound objects, like pitch class theory, and using timbre per se as the main factor in generating music. Liminality of harmony timbre perception means that in certain circumstances, these two sound dimensions could switch one to another. In our days, timbre is the favorite realm for music composition, inspiring multiple philosophies related to sound. Timbre was initially emancipated in Impressionism, Debussy, Ravel, by empowering complex harmonies to become harmonic colors. This is an example of timbre as a product of harmony, which occurs in music of normal density level, whereas details such as melody, harmony, rhythm can be distinctively perceived. Modern music brought the concept of sound mass, referring to conglomerates of sounds that prevent the details to be perceived. In the case of super dense structures, the liminal relationship between harmony and timbre is more obvious. Harmony becomes timbre, or more accurately hypertimbre, due to the complex harmonic and inharmonic composites that emerge in sound-crowded mass. The oral system can no longer depict fundamental frequencies and shifts the perception towards the resulting global timbre. I called this switch phenomenon aperceptive modulations. As Tristan Muraille, the French spectralist composer, observed, harmony and timbre at the spectral level are one and the same phenomenon. Here there are two examples of different density levels in music perception. For the detailed level, I chose Debussy, Prélude à l'après-midi d'homme faune. I found Ligeti atmosphere a relevant example for the sound mass level, whereas harmony perception is saturated and can no longer depict harmonic templates, shifting towards overall timbre perception. Mimesis of the sound spectrum is an important direction in modern music. In an Aristotelian paradigm, the musical sound structure in its spectral intimacy is pure nature that presents itself, and the musical art is called to represent it. In this sense, composer's imagination was triggered by the evolution of the spectral analysis and of electronic manipulation of the sound. From traditional representation of an audio waveform, like in example number 1, to modern computerized spectral analysis, which provide more detailed spectrograms, frequency and time with amplitudes encoded in colors, enabling us to visualize the overtones of the musical lines. Here in the second example, we have two-voice Byzantine chant. The horizontal line in yellow, it's a bass drone, the voice who is singing the bass drone, and you could see its overtones in depth, the parallel lines. And the other voice is the curved line, which is playing a melismatic melody, and we could see its overtones. We also have nowadays, we also have 3D surface spectrogram, and also 3D animated spectrograms. All these influenced the imagination of composers. Mimesis of various aspects of the sound spectrum in the instrumental music was the foundation of 3 original aesthetics: sonorism, spectralism, and nanomusic. The sonorism style appeared among the Polish school of composition. Krzysztof Penderecki's original approach to sonorism consisted in mirroring and transferring in orchestral writing various processes used in electronic manipulation of the sound, such as rig modulation, additive synthesis, etc. Such sonoristic works include the Natura Sonoris or Polymorphia. Here there is an example from the Natura Sonoris number 2. French spectralism is another example of mimetic aesthetics, initially based on recreating the harmonic and inharmonic spectrum of certain timbres in the reality of acoustic instruments. Timbre acts metaphorically as foundation for the macrostructure of the music, evolving in an enlarged time space. It developed simultaneously in Romania and France. In France, Gerard Grisez, Tristan Muraille, Horatiu Rădulescu of Romanian origin, and in Romania, Corneliu Cezar, Octav Nemescu, and Iancu Dumitrescu. Example, Gerard Grisez, partial. We could hear a low double bass and then its partial. The third mimetic aesthetics focuses on the various sound envelope stages. Nanomusic is a term that I introduced for music that creatively reproduces the stages of a musical sound envelope: attack, sustain, decay, and eventually release. A whole hidden world is revealed to our musical perception as if it were seen with a magnifying glass, from nano to macro perception scale. Helmut Lachenmann wrote about 2 classes of sound types: sound as process and sound as object. He describes through musical examples several sound types in new music: cadential sound, timbre sound, texture sound, and structure sound. Cadential sound, like in example number 1, is always a process that points to the transient and decay phases of the sound envelope. It is a combination of sounds that evolves in time, similar to a traditional cadenza. Its innate time, Eigenzeit, is identical with the time that the sound will generally take to unfold. Hypertimbralism. Timbre vocabulary has intensively enlarged, but did it generate a syntax of its own? The musical streams presented above, sonorist, spectralism, and nanomusic, all are timbre-oriented and all reject traditional referentiality. They embrace rather a post-Weberian purity of expression. Nonetheless, they are not purely sonic aesthetics, but mirroring the template of the sound. The proposed hypertimbralism is a broader concept, which allows more freedom while composing with timbre as the main structural element, seeking musical beauty, intertextuality, and connecting with universal heritage, cultural heritage. Many contemporary works could be regarded as hypertimbral and could be analyzed as such. Composers like Jonathan Harvey, Salvatore Sciarrino, Gaia Sariaho are only a few that might fall in this category. Hyper in Greek means excessive. Hypertimbre is defined as a chimeric composite timbre with an excessive amount of distorted timbres involved. It carries an enlarged polyspectrum with harmonicity and inharmonicity coexisting in various degrees. It can be decomposed by the ear in its components, and it is perceived as an aggregate typical of sound mass. Hypertimbre concept applies also to a single sound that is enriched, distorted by means of extended techniques, and therefore has an excess of polyspectral energy on the sound-noise continuum axis. Its sonic quality includes more than the steady portion of vibration, which is typical for classical music. The amount of inharmonicity will be increased due to the attack transient being stressed by the non-conventional instrumental techniques. Hypertimbralism is the aesthetic resulted from the creative use of hypertimbres, evolving in time and providing musical meaningfulness by means of hyperlinks. Unlike prior timbre-based aesthetics, hypertimbralism seeks referentiality and intertextuality. It means that hypertimbres will be linked in signification with others within the same text or from another text, similarly to hyperlinks within a hypertext. Further, I will present musical examples of sensitiveness hyperlinks, intercultural hyperlinks, and mythological hyperlinks. In traditional classical music, drama is created by harmonic tensions. Hypertimbres can also create tensions by their ratio of sensory dissonance consonants. Crowded textures or non-thematic surfaces could also provide perception of various levels of tonalness, various ratios of harmonicity, inharmonicity, or sensation of fusion segregation. Does timbre or hypertimbre carry a musical meaning? In Aristotelian key, what part of nature does it represent? The musical meaning of timbre is to be found in the perception realm, that is in the type of spectral listening. According to William Cesares, there are two kinds of listening, a sound or a combination of sounds, which both involve spectral perception: holistic listening and analytic listening. Holistic listening means hearing the sound as a single entity, not being aware of its accompanying partials. The resulting phenomenon is called spectral fusion. By the contrary, while listening a sound in certain conditions of attack, we could perceive some partials. This kind of listening is called analytic listening, and the resulting phenomenon is called spectral fission. All the verbal description of timbre are derived from these two modes of listening. The sensation of timbre can be described in many ways: velvet, delicate, dark, brassy, round. Some description hyperlinks go to other senses than hearing, like sight and touch. Other hyperlinks go to natural elements that we perceive with our senses. When perceiving timbre, we also refer to its texture: smooth, grainy, transparent, dense. All these descriptions apply to a single sound or a combination of sounds. Hypertimbres could be linked with various cultures or imaginary ones. Such hypertimbral works displaying cultural intertextuality are many in the contemporary repertoire. I will present a few examples. Sophia by Dulinas, string quartet number 4, is set for 3 quartets. 2 of them are pre-recorded, tuned a quarter tune apart, and 1 quarter playing live. This work is full of timbral beauty, but the most airy sonority results from the ricochet tremolos on the strings, obtained by means of mallets consisting of a ball attached to an elastic string. The resulting rich tremolo resembles in my imagination with the typical tremolos of a Russian balalaika. This is an example of hypertimbralism with cultural referentiality. The combination of the 3 superimposed quartets generate an overall augmented timbre, a chimeric one, with multiple hyperlinks that resemble Baroque style or choral-like structures alluding Renaissance. The whole work is strongly connected to modernity at the highest complexity level. The opera In Nuce Herzris by Violeta Dinescu, in 11 scenes for solo voice with percussion, has been written in 2004. The composer gathered moments from previous vocal works. It presents 5 female characters encompassing Greek mythology to modern theater. Circe from Concerto for Orchestra and Obbligato voice, text from Homer Odyssea, Erendira and the Abuela from the opera Erendira, Gabriel Garcia Marquez, Tante Adelaide and Maria from the play of, by Eugen Ionescu, from the opera Hunger and Thirst, based on the play of Eugen Ionescu. All 5 characters represent different hypostases of the same being. Circe is the one who makes them appear and disappear like in a labyrinth of one woman's soul. The whole opera was sung by the phenomenal singer Christina Asher, who modulated her voice to obtain distinctive 5 vocal timbres reaching extreme registers. This is an example of a vocal hypertimbre obtained not only by enlarging the normal mezzo-soprano voice range, but also by the singer's ability to generate a great variety of timbres by extending the non-conventional vocal techniques. If we take into account only the first part assigned to Circe, the frightening enchantress and minor goddess, it reveals a deep resonant alto voice who can perform different kinds of vibrato, of glissandi, of screaming, transforming the voice into a powerful and impactful instrument. The natural resonance of the voice is further enhanced by the resonance of the open piano box and of the windy vibrations of the spring drum. All these timbral expressions are hyperlinks to the mythological story and to its environment: island, wind, water, mystery, danger, witchcraft. The sudden timbral shift to the wooden cementron not only is an effective musical contrast, but a direct reference to the ancient Greek ethos. The instrument is still used in the Greek and Romanian Orthodox Church. Let's listen to the first part featuring Circe. few examples from my own works now will complete the presentation. Rites for Enchanting the Air, Concerto for Flute, is a relevant example for a hypertimbral approach because the entire composition strategy is based on modulating the timbral potential of the instrument. The poetic idea of this concerto is to reveal the magic of the sound appearing through the air vibrations. The air is here regarded as the primary element of nature, along with fire, water, and earth. This concerto is like an incantation such as we could find in pre-Christian cultures. This rite is for making sacred the air we breathe. Mysterium Tremendum is a cantata based on a syntagma introduced by Rudolf Otto, Mysterium Tremendum et Fascinans, which expresses the duality of religious feeling. We are both shaken and fascinated in front of divine mystery. It's a multilingual text in Romanian, the Heroic, in English, the Gospel of Matthew, and Dies Irae in Latin. I intended an ecumenical music, East and West, timbral ethos. Here is an example of my symphony, Archimedes Symphony. I intended powerful and massive sonorities. And this is the last example from my ballet, Le Rouge et le Noir, a few seconds. is my presentation. It's already 33 minutes past. So yes, future prospects of this hypertimbralism, which I think is a broader concept for some part of contemporary music, will be seeking for poetry, for lyricism, expressing even drama and lyricism with timbre. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Livia. You are so generous with your wonderful lecture. Thank you. And Ioannis, please, can you come again?
Thank you. Yes. Thank you, Livia, for this excellent presentation, and different, quite different, and unique, I would say. And I'm looking forward to the future plans and works that you already have noticed at the last slide. Thank you. Now,
Yes,
ladies and gentlemen, I would like to invite Anastasios or TASSOS Boutis, who is a emeritus professor at the Department of Mathematics, University of Patras in Greece. He has been the director of the Center for Research and Application of Non-Linear Systems of the University of Patras and the Laboratory of Non-Linear Systems and Applied Analysis. Today, he's a visiting professor in the Department of Mathematics in the State University of Yaroslavl, Russia. A corresponding member of the Academy of Athens in the chair of complex systems and the recipient of 2014 Charles Hermit Science Ambassador Award of Saar, Germany, and the 2009 Academy of Athens Award for Dynamical Systems. He's a member of our academy. He obtained his PhD degree in physics from the University of Rochester in New York, and has worked at Caltech and Clarkston University in America. He has also been invited lecturer and researching in several countries in Europe, Mexico, India, Japan, Brazil, New Zealand, Australia, and South Korea. His research has been supported by many American, European, and Greek grants. He has organized or co-organized various international conferences and summer schools on nonlinear dynamics and complexity, and international PhD schools on mathematical modeling of complex systems. He has authored 5 books in Greek on dynamical systems and fractals, and 1 in English on complex Hamiltonian dynamics. He is in the editorial board of international journals. He has published more than 160 papers in reference journals.
Enough.
Conference proceedings. I have the honor to present TASSOS. TASSOS, the screen is yours.
Thank you very much. You can all hear me, I hope?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Let me then go on to share my screen. I believe you see something?
Yes.
Okay. And this should work. Well, I was very impressed by the previous talk, and I wish I had some sound and some beautiful music to offer you also. But this time we will turn to the visual arts, and also the more practical aspects of mathematics. And I hope to be able to connect the two. And afterwards, we will have a discussion also, I believe, on the previous talk, and hopefully find some common ground between the arts and science. I will start by saying a few words about how I view geometric complexity in nature around me, and how can the word complexity become more mathematical, in other words. So that's how we will be led to something called fractal geometry, a new type of geometry that we didn't have more than 50 years ago. Then we are going to wonder now, coming more to aesthetics, are the fractal shapes we see around us in nature, and the ones we can construct even, would we call them beautiful? We will find out that this question was asked already after certain paintings were painted by artists who had no idea what fractal is all about. And yet they seem to find it beautiful or attractive or aesthetic enough to use it quote unquote, use it unwillingly in their works. So then I will come to the last part, which is inclusions, conclusions, and some important references that I have, and I will share with all of you, sending you the PDF file afterwards and so on. So let me begin by something that a famous Greek poet, very great Greek poet, Kostis Palamas, reminded when he said 100 years ago that, remember when you strive to reach a high peak, even if you get there, there will be yet another higher one to reach. So I thought of this picture when I read this poem. And then Palamas continued to say that even if you manage to climb the highest peak, you will find that you are still standing below the stars, which brought to me this picture in mind. Now, as a human being, I have to ask myself if this is beautiful. Certainly it's complex. I think we will all agree with that. But the question is there any order in this complexity? Now, it doesn't seem, I mean, we heard a lot of physicists, astrophysicists, astronomers telling us that there are structures in the universe, galaxies and nebulas and whatnot. And yet it all looks so random, but it isn't. If I told you this is not a picture, but a painting, would you find this beautiful? And let me come down to the earth now. We look at a tree. What is it that impresses us about the structure of a tree? It's branching out, it's the way it develops, and even more so, a leaf even. Let's go closer to the tree. How can we understand this complexity? Well, I'm sure that if I ask you, what do you observe about the geometry of this leaf? I think you all see that it is certainly not random, right? It looks that there is some structure, and if I can guide you a little bit, I would say that there seems to be some kind of law that governs the branching of the veins. For example, if you can see my pointer, the distance from the main vein to the secondary one here is almost the same as the distance from this one to the next branching out. Up, excuse me, I went a little bit ahead. And if I was to go to sub veins, then you would also recognize that there is some similarity in the distances, and that these distances, or here of the secondary veins, are much smaller than the big ones. And everything seems to get smaller by a scale, smaller. And so we start to think, could this be because nature has to fit all of this in a small space? What is the reason for the branching of the veins in this seemingly orderly matter? Well, let's look at other complicated objects in nature. What about a coral? Pulling together itself in this peculiar shape. What about a sponge, which is so small? And yet, as we know, if we stretch it out, it's a surface, a very large surface approaching even the size of a tennis court. And yet it's all confined in a small space. So nature must have a reason for doing these things. And the first questions were asked many, many years ago by two mathematicians who had no idea about fractals. They didn't care much about nature. They just wanted to ask a simple question. These mathematicians, Giuseppe Peano, David Hilbert, are very well known in the field of mathematics and respected, and we use a lot of their results to date. But you know, people play games. So I'm sure that they originally looked at this as a game. When Hilbert started to build a picture by this shape on the left, repeating it in smaller scales on the right, and then going to the right more, you see the same picture here, repeated 4 times, turned around like this. He was trying to construct a curve that fills the plane. So the question in his mind was, is there a difference between 1 dimension and 2 dimensions? What if there is a difference? What if between 1 and 2, there is a lot of other dimensions, a whole world we have not seen before? and between 2 and 3 and 4 and 5. So he said, let me try to do this, to fill this picture by a line, fill this square. So where would you say Hilbert's curve lives? Is it in 1 or 2 space dimensions? Can we use it? Now let's be more practical. You know, mathematicians, scientists like to see things really practical. I don't like only 2 dimensions. Let me go to 3 dimensions. Now, if I extend Hilbert's curve in 3 dimensions, it's a very awkward little shape with a lot of corners and things like that, but it is quite convoluted. It already reaches the point we want to go. And technically speaking, I mean, we all have a friend who knows about computer graphics, and somebody who knows will take our idea and produce this. And now we have something that starts to look like a realistic coral. So what is fractal geometry? What did you observe in the previous models? I think you saw a similarity between the initial figure and its parts that appears in smaller and smaller scales. This property is a very fundamental law of fractal geometry. It's called self-similarity under scale. We consider it to be one of the most important keys for understanding some of the mysteries of the complexity of nature. Does nature use it perhaps to fit large size objects in very limited spaces? It must be so. How could a sponge survive in the sea if it were not wrapped around in a small volume like this? How could a coral survive if it didn't have that shape? So now that we have some ideas about nature, let's try to play our game. Let's try to create such an object ourselves, and I will do it in a systematic way by adding to a straight line smaller pieces of a straight line by the size 1/3. And I'll continue to do this. Every time, remember, I am decreasing objects by a scale. In this case, it's 1/3. It's going to be 1/9, it's going to be 1/27, and so on. So what am I going to end up with? Well, I'm going to end up with a curve that is infinitely long. And that can be shown to any student. It's a simple calculation. Do you believe I have made a coastline that if you stretch it, you will reach the end of the universe? And it's all hidden inside those little triangles and this convoluted shape that you see here. That's why its dimension is not 1, but it's not 2 either, because it doesn't fill the whole plane. So what have we done? We have managed, practically speaking, to encode an infinite amount of information in just a few mathematical operations. Is it perhaps nature that does or can do something similar? Well, now let's be a little more careful. Let's say, no, I now want to come down from 2 dimensions to 1. I want to start removing, take a 2-dimensional object, this equilateral triangle, remove the middle triangle, and keep doing this all the way to the end. By iteration, we mean that we are going to repeat this many, many, many times. And what are we going to end up with? Again, an object that's between 1 and 2 dimensions, but remember, it's called the Serpinski Gasket, very famous, and lives, but like the Koch, but imagine the dimension. Would you believe that the dimension is bigger than the one we saw before? I think you would, because this to me looks like a more filling the space. So it has to have a bigger dimension than the previous one, the Koch curve, which was 1.256. So we are beginning to get some intuition about what dimensionality means and how we can quantify bigger dimension, smaller dimension, what is going on here. Well, we have to be fair. We have to mention, of course, at some point, the one who coined the word fractals and who gave us this beautiful new geometry in 1975, the mathematician Benoit Mandelbrot, who specifically worked with a very simple mathematical example that you see here. And he went to the plane xy of this parameter, and in fact, to parameter c, and he revealed a mysterious island in which on the boundary of this island, all the way to the boundary, if you take Zn and you iterate it generations and generations n+1, you will never go to infinity. But be careful, if you start a little outside the island, you go to infinity. This island has been called one of the most complex mathematical objects and looks like this. Now I invite you to go to the internet and you will lose yourself. I cannot do justice to this picture. You will lose yourself in the incredible richness of the boundary of this island. What happens in the big black regions is more or less simple, understood, but the boundary is an extremely complicated phenomenon, and it all results from this ridiculously simple equation, Benoit Mandelbrot. So indeed, you will meet endless surprises as you travel into deeper and deeper and deeper scales of this beautiful island. Well, let's come back to our question. Aren't then fractals useful for storing information? Seems to be that's a good idea. And to understand it better, let's take a tree. What do you think a mathematician first noticed in a tree? Now, we also like beautiful things and beautiful pictures of nature, but we like to look through them to find out exactly how they are formed. So mathematicians may not have very much imagination, but we like to think of a tree as branching out in scales, say branches smaller than a half, smaller than a quarter, then smaller than an eighth, and so on, and making some rotation to the branches. How else can the tree grow to a reasonable height? If you allow the branches just get smaller, some trees will go to hundreds of meters high. So they don't, because everything reduces by a certain scale. So now in our poor little mathematical world, let's just simply draw the branches. Any child can do that and find out that the tree stops after a few centimeters on your piece of paper. It's all done. And it looks like we have unraveled something about the structure of a tree. But now we want more sophisticated approaches. We need better mathematical models. In mathematics, we always try to do better. As in every science, you are never satisfied. You want to do better, to understand complexity. So now, the first person who did that was Michael Barnsley. I'm proud to say, mathematician, a colleague, American professor, Michael Barnsley in the 80s, one of the few mathematicians who made money because he created a company called Iterated Function Systems. Michael Barnsley proved that if we take an object and we repeat it to smaller scales, the final object will be the same no matter how we started this process. In other words, he said, what matters is the contracting transformations we use, or nature uses, not the shapes we start with. So any tree would start in some way, but in the end, all the trees in some kind of forest, in some contained habitat, they will look alike, all the trees. Let's look at an example of what Barnsley said. He took a square, A0, and he placed it 3 times in the same place, but putting one on top of the other. Now repeat this, he said, with his transformations, again and again and again. And look, what happens is obvious. We are going down, and what do you think we end up with? Our good old friend, the Serpinski Gasket, which we found removing triangles from inside triangles and going all this. Well, you can construct it by a couple of transformations and you're done. Well, then why not be more ambitious now? Can we do better? Well, Barnsley said, don't rush. Let's try a little bit more. Let's now try to put one square on top of the other, but now I want you to rotate one and rotate the other in different ways. Just keep doing this. Look at the next picture. I see the same thing here, but the one below is turned, and the one here is turned. So before you know it, you're getting something that looks like these ivy formations we see on the walls of our houses. You don't know what you will end up with, but you know the transformations from the beginning, and they lead you to this shape. What more can we achieve? Well, let's take, said Barnsley, the top figure here as a parallelogram, but as I said, you can change it into an ellipse of this kind. The important things that I want you to apply to this shape, 4 transformations. 1, you will make it a little smaller and create number 1, turning to the right. 2, you create it even smaller and turn it to the left, and then again to the right. And don't forget to add the 4. It is a very thin rectangle, almost like a line, which will be actually the basic branch of the leaf. And now let's find out what happens. The stem, that's the word I was using. 4 is going to be like the stem of the leaf. Now, what happens after many iterations of this process? I gave you the rules. You can do it on the computer. It'll take some time, but what you will see, I think is amazing. There is something that I believe when somebody sees it for the first time, doesn't notice, he thinks it's a photograph, a picture. It's not a photograph. If you look at it closely, it's obvious what it is. The repetition of the same leaf over and over and over again. But it fools you a little bit. And maybe nature fools us also by this trick. And it's a mathematical fern, but it's actually built by these very simple rules that we have seen. And I don't know about you, but I would say it's remarkable, and it's a little beautiful also. Nature is beautiful in a way. So we've learned that, to see it that way. And so we are trying to imitate nature, if you like. Well, and let's come now down to fractal analysis now and paintings and art. There was a paper in Nature 399 by Mr. Taylor and his colleague, who claimed that he was really audacious and he did something daring. He took paintings and started to analyze them from a mathematical point of view. This is heretic. People would get upset by that, but he did it in a very careful scientific way. And he came up to the conclusion that Jackson Pollock, the most famous American painter of last century, started with straight lines, which were dimension 1 and 43, and by 753, he ended up with canvases that had dimension 1.7. How can that be? This is one of the paintings of Pollock called Alchemy, but you will find on the internet a lot of other paintings of his, since he started to do this in various layers of paint many years in his life, until the end of his life. These are very huge canvases with a lot of detail in them, but let's ask ourselves, how did he do it? Well, Taylor actually calculated the dimension of this fractal. And he said, you know something? Fractal analysis could be used as a technique to validate if a painting is by Pollock, or to date even Pollock's paintings. Well, I wouldn't be so hopeful about the first, but I would say to date Pollock's paintings, yeah, I mean, it's the same person, so you should be able to date, to put some dates on his paintings and look at the fractal dimension. But to validate a painting is too far to ask. Okay, let's go a little more in the techniques, the details. Pollock actually, starting in 1943, he had a single layer of paint, occupying 20% of the canvas. By 1952, he was putting multiple layers that covered 90% of his canvas. So the initial layer acted as a base for the subsequent layers and finally determined the value of D. The interesting thing, I think you all will appreciate this if you haven't read it, Taylor actually investigated the connection between neurobiology and fractals. He asked people to view these paintings of Pollock, and he used MRI, magnetic resonance, and electroencephalogram, and skin conductance data. He was able to establish that looking at fractals reduces human stress levels. You don't have to take a pill, just look at a fractal picture and you'll feel better. Now, well, Taylor is a serious scientist, and so he puts on this proposition, which I think is very daring, that there is an aesthetic appeal of fractals that might possibly be measured physiologically. So of course, fractality can be decided only if you examine it by detail. You have to go down to smaller and smaller scales. So I decided with Thanasis Fokas, the famous Greek mathematician in Cambridge, and a colleague of mine from electrical engineering in Patras, Emmanuel Psarakis, and we wrote a paper that was actually published in a Journal of Arts and Technology. And we performed a careful mathematical analysis of 3 paintings by Piet Mondrian, the famous Dutch painter, using methods of fractal geometry. As you probably imagine, we focused on the dense parts of the foliage of the trees and the branches here in the dense parts, and try to make some sense of it. Let's see, is Taylor right? Can one find such dimensions in other painters as well? You see, Mondrian also died in 44. He had no idea about fractals, and even not of Pollock. So these are the two paintings, the Red Tree and the Farm near Davendrecht of Mondrian. So what did we do? Very simple. We simply covered the painting by boxes, and we started to look at boxes of smaller and smaller and smaller scale in order to converge somewhere to find something. So you see the grids have L1 0.75 millimeter, 0.5 millimeter, 0.25. We counted the number of boxes that had some piece of the tree inside them, the dark ones. The white ones have no tree in them, but the dark ones do. So as we increase this, we said, well, the tree has some mass, right? M, and that M is constant. So how do I define the dimension? By this power. Everybody does that. Not only fractal practitioners, everyone knows that the dimension is a power. If this D was 2, this would be a part of the plane. This is 2-dimensional. If it was 1, this would have been a line. But no, D came out to be somewhere between 1.7 and 1.8 in this very simple analysis. But then we went to Psarakis, our third author, who is an expert in image analysis, and we told him, take our data and proceed deeper into the fractal, which you cannot do in practice, but you can do it by using an optimization problem. If we could do it, what's the best way we could continue it all the way to small scales? And by using a technique called linear regression, he found for the 2 trees exactly the same slope. And he told us it is 1.75. Well, is it exactly 1.75? No, but it is close. It is close. And is Pollock happy because he's 1.7? Is Mondrian doing something like Pollock at that stage? Well, we have to think. And in that regard, when you dare to speak about such topics that people may get upset by you measuring art by the meter and by mathematics, you should go back in history to find out that very important people did that. And that's George David Berkov, a famous mathematician, who wrote a book, believe it or not, in 1933 called Aesthetic Measure. Now, if Berkov dares to do it, why not we? He defined aesthetic measure as the ratio between order, as he called it, number of regularities found in an image, whatever he meant, and complexity, number of elements in an image. So he started it, and I must refer now here to this very inspiring lecture by Matthias Perk. Last time we had a meeting, you recall Matthias spoke about his classifying tendencies in art, pointillism, impressionism, expressionism, irrational painting, Dali, everybody, and the silver one, all in a plot between entropy and complexity. So, if I look at this plot, I must come to the conclusion that Mondrian and Pollock actually featured down at the bottom with the Impressionists, the Expressionists, the Cubists, at the bottom of the figure 1 and 2, and it has high entropy. In other words, as Matthias said, a high content of information, a lot of information, but low complexity. In other words, maybe we could describe the complexity of Pollock's painting and Mondrian in simpler terms. It's not so complicated. Like, for example, Chagall, or other paintings earlier in the century, Matisse. They are more complex, but not so high information. So essentially, I end with this rather revolutionary work of art, or work of science, I would say, where these authors, together with Taylor was among them, who dared to take Pollock's paintings together with Bach's three-part Ricercar piece of music, analyzed it to scales. Music has scales, as the previous speaker very well told us, and paintings have scales, and put people around the room to listen to music and to look at those paintings of Pollock and Mondrian and other in fractals, and he found that everybody liked something a little more modest. They didn't like too much complexity, go to 1.7, so they liked more 1.3, 1.5. Both artists, even Bach and Pollock, that's what people said when they were faced with these two works of art. Well, I may have been a little daring, I hope, and there will be some discussion, but I want to thank you very much for your attention and patience with me.
Thank you, Tassos. Thank you for the didactic and illuminating lecture, if I could say. And so the mathematical transformations indeed lead to a beauty in nature. Very interesting presentation. Thank you. I would like to ask now any questions for the first presentation by Livia. Is there any question?
Questions or comments? Oh, yeah, Klaus.
Yeah. Can you see my sign?
Yes, please.
Yeah.
Klaus.
Actually, I have a remark to both, because, but then a question to Livia, because TASSOS mentioned in the beginning of his talk that there may be a common ground for both talks, and that I think is obvious. The common talk is a theory of complex dynamical systems. Why? In music, you consider sound dynamics. And Livia mentioned the spectrum analysis that is well known in physics to analyze this kind of dynamics. And TASSOS mentioned mainly fractal dimension. And fractal dimension is also a measure to analyze dynamics, but a special phase of dynamics. And he mentioned that in the last part of his talk, namely chaos. That means you can have periodic phases, quasi-periodic phases, equilibrium phases, and then chaotic development. And fractal dimension is often used in mathematics to characterize these kind of chaotic structures. Now, my question to Livia is, I was fascinated in the beginning of the talk. I was not prepared to hear that from you as a composer. It seemed to be that you are very well familiar with these physical criteria. For example, spectrum analysis, and then you even mentioned eigenvalues. And then I was electroized because it's well known this kind of complex dynamics is what mathematicians call nonlinear. And nonlinear equations can in general not be solved. And therefore, they use a trick, and that means linearization. Simplified, approximative equations. And the technique, linearization, is then in these linear equations to compute the eigenvalues. It is a so-called eigenequation, sometimes called. And so my question to you is, what in the hell are the eigenvalues in your music, and why is it and where is it in detail used? And in the background there is the question, is that only your special expertise, or modern composing needs these mathematical groundings, and it is well known to all these contemporary composers? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Of course, we don't need mathematical background to compose, but musicologists or even the composer has to be able to analyze his own work, and then inspiration comes along. I don't think I understood the question about values. It's about time. What I spoke about the three-dimensional spectrograms, or what is eigenvalues?
You mentioned, I'm not quite sure, you mentioned Eigenwert or Eigenvalues?
Values.
Value, yeah.
No, I mentioned Eigenzeit.
Eigenzeit, yes. What means Eigenzeit?
Okay.
Eigenzeit.
Eigenzeit. I mentioned.
Yes, that is well known also in physics, namely in the relativity of Einstein, the Eigenzeit. But perhaps you can explain it.
Yeah,
yes.
I could explain. It's very interesting. Helmut Lachenmann, his music is based on putting a magnifying glass on the sound envelopes. So it means they attack with transients, attack transients, sustain and decay. So he orchestrated these phases in music. He put a marimba with a viola for the attack, and the viola had a tremolo and then disappear. And he said that this kind of sound will take as long as the natural decay will be. So the duration of the musical event is equal with the duration of the sound of the to decay. With its Eigenzeit, he said. So it's very interesting. Unless other sound types, for example, sound mass with many layers involved. He names this timbre sound. So there is a lot of movement inside, but we hear like one single sound with internal movements, like in a stationary portion of vibrations. So he always links his musical events with either attack, sustain, or decay. Putting this in music, with instruments. Yeah. So it's a philosophy. It's a mimesis of this envelope, the envelope of sound.
Yeah, I get now an idea of what he meant when you described the different developments of in music between different instruments. Is that right? They are, and each development has its Eigenzeit.
Yes.
And that is that's more or less the idea actually in Einstein's relativistic idea that the different inertial systems or reference systems, these are the different instruments or something like that, that they have their Eigenzeit.
Yes, it's very nice.
Relative
very
to the reference system, that means here to the instrument. I have now an idea. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Violeta.
Yeah. So thank you so much for this
I would
correspondence
have-
of ideas. Yeah,
Yes,
please.
Yeah, we have questions. Yes, I wanted to ask previous speaker, Livia, very interesting. Your sounds seem to come more from string instruments and other sounds like that, similar to that. Now, you know that many composers, I have in mind particularly Ioannis Xenakis, the Greek
Yes.
composer who lived in Paris, who was among the first to combine sounds of different instruments, including drums, a lot.
Yeah, yeah.
Before we go to electronic music, right, which is much more modern and, well, very, very, yeah, interesting way to combine sounds. But he did it with different instruments, which sounded to me very complex at the time, some kind of complexity. What do you say about that? Is that, how is that complexity compared to the one you are using in your compositions?
Thank you. Xenakis is one of the first composers to use sound mass, but it was not arbitrary, but calculating, stochastic.
He was a mathematician, right?
Yeah, mathematician. He was also an architect, and yes. So, but in my view, I am using density. You see, like many strings, like. But
mass, no, not mass. No.
Sound mass with details on top of this. I mean, I want also the melodic line to be perceived and surrounded by this sound mass. So sound mass I use like a hypertimbral, like a timbral environment, but still not. This is not all about it. I still need melodic and tensions, and all these are from classical tradition. If we think of melody, rhythmic things, so I use on simultaneously detailed music and sound mass, and I noticed that.
Yes,
Yeah.
but I thought so, because you mentioned Goodbye Dolina, who to me well, has also beautiful music in it. Besides the complexity of it and the randomness,
Yes.
here was it Sophie Mutter who had recorded.
Yeah.
It sounds complicated at times, but it has also beautiful notes and melodies. I see what you mean.
Yeah.
Any other comments? So we can move to the next speaker, TASSOS Boudis. Is there any comment or any question for TASSOS Boudis?
If there is no one who will start, then
Klaus,
perhaps I can ask, because I know TASSOS very well, and he knows me very well from former conferences. Yes, of course.
And Willibald knows me, and Marko Rovnik knows me. Okay.
Yes, of course. We had several conferences on complexity and complex dynamics. So my question relates to the last part of your talk. You mentioned Berkov and these early ideas to relate the whole calculus of complex dynamics and the mathematical measures now to these aesthetical questions. And the old traditional idea since antiquity, is there a mathematical measure to calculate beauty or something like that? That is an old Platonic idea. And especially my feeling is in modern contemporary music and contemporary painting, of course, you can find these similarities with structures in complex dynamics, and then you have the mathematical formulas and so on. And that was the idea of Berkov and others. But the surprising experience for me is that there must be something else, not only the mathematical structure, what we call psychology, the feeling, what is going on in the brain. For example, Bach, you mentioned Bach. Bach is a very complex mathematical structures, the fugues and things like that. But on the other hand, very simple people without any education in music, musical theory, and things like that, no background. But they are shocked and deeply touched by this kind of music. And that is obviously independent of the culture. It is in Japan, it is in China, it is in Europe and elsewhere. What is the reason? Other mathematical structures, for example, in contemporary music and painting, are sometimes strange to the people. But so my question is more in the direction of cognitive science, in brain and something like that. There must be something be added to the mathematical descriptions, which we all know, for example, from complex dynamical systems.
Yeah.
Well, one thing I can tell you is that I am proceeding very carefully with these comparisons I find them fascinating when I read that Taylor and his group studied the social complexity of the way people feel about music when it has the dimension 1.2, 1.3. But you know, sometimes I'm reminded of this famous scene of the movie, The Dead Poets Society, where the teacher opens the book that he has to teach to the students on a page that says, plot in X and Y the beauty of this poem. And he tears the page apart and throws the book away. If you have seen it, I think there are some limits. Perhaps Matthias, who is here, will also can comment on this. We have to go only so far, because as you said correctly, people who have not heard about fractals or complexity or entropy or anything like this can still be moved by all these beautiful artworks. Absolutely. So where is it? Not in the cognitive science. There is something quite deeper than that. But at any rate, I would not forbid somebody or criticize if somebody does want to measure. There are things in art that can be measured. I can only say that. But not so much on the aesthetics.
Yes, Philip.
Before maybe Matthias answers, I have another question to both of you. So we had now two talks. The one was on beauty in visual arts through the eyes of physics. And today it was the beauty in the visual arts through the eyes of mathematics. So the question is there a correspondence between these two definitions of beauty, or even a mapping that could map the one and the other?
Matthias, you take that.
Unmute.
Hi. Hello, everyone.
Maybe you should first recall that you had the definition of beauty in physics through the eyes of physics in complexity and entropy.
No, it looks much the same. I feel so. First, I have to say I would like to say thank you to both speakers. Really interesting lectures. Especially also thank you to TASSOS, for drawing such nice parallels between my work and work that was almost 100 years old. I have to admit I wasn't really fully aware of it, so it was really an enlightening lecture for me. So TASSOS, thank you very much. If I can go to the aesthetics part, there are people are now doing functional magnetic resonance to see I mean, whilst people are exposed to either visual art or even more so musical art, and they are trying to record which parts of the brain get active and why, and how this translates to feelings of happiness and relaxation and things like that. So this research is already underway. And but I'm not sure if this really quantifies aesthetics, right? So I mean, I don't know, because the beauty is also in the eye of the beholder, and you know what I think is beautiful may be ugly to somebody else. So these are really quite subjective things, and I certainly also agree with TASSOS that we have to be very careful, you know, going forward, and not to offend anybody, and also not to jump to conclusions that then will later become somehow unsustainable, or will be immediately found as unsustainable even by those by artists, you know, who probably think about these things much more than physicists and mathematicians. So. And in terms of the analogies, I've seen a lot of them during the lectures, you know. So if there is a correspondence between mathematics and physics and beauty, I would say certainly yes. You know, I mean, TASSOS was going through it through the theory of fractals, and how this ultimately translated into complexity and some beautiful things in nature. I was working more with just complexity and entropy, but certainly these things are very closely related, you know, as are physics and mathematics, you know, because the language of physics is mathematics. So there are certainly very clear analogies, and if somebody would take the time and work a little bit harder, I'm sure it would be surely possible to formalize this also, you know, quite rigorously. So.
Yeah, but this would be a hope then. This would be a challenge to find out a mapping, a possible mapping.
Yeah, you know, but I mean, with this colloquium, things are proceeding sort of quite fast, because before that, I mean, fast in terms of that, before that, these were really quite isolated efforts, you know. So somebody did something in the 40s of the previous century, and then in the 60s a little bit more, and then in the 80s a little bit more. We did something now, you know, a couple of years ago, but these are really isolated sort of events. And
I would say, Matthias and Willibald, I would say the answer to your question is that it's through the word complexity that you say physics and mathematics. That's what it is. And the previous speaker, Livia Teodorescu, CIOCANEA, she spoke very well about complexity, very, very dense kind of complexity in music. So I think that is the common word that we try to all understand better.
I agree.
If I have understood correctly, fractals are a systematic approach to complexity. In fact, it is a symmetry transformation which concerns the scales, right?
That's right.
Yeah, but
so maybe this is the way. Then this is the way then to explain Matthias complexity through this approach of symmetry transformations via fractals.
But fractal is not a dynamical measure.
Yeah.
Fractal is in the dynamical systems theory only reserved to describe a special attractor. Not completely, but some of these chaotic attractors
and the concept of entropy is very
fractal.
important.
In that sense, it is also an aspect of dynamical systems. But in the end, I think, from a contemporary point of view, we are all nowadays engaged more or less in information. And so it is information dynamics. That is for me fascinating. And so the entropy measures are very important nowadays, Kolmogorov-Sinai entropy, things like that, to describe these kind of dynamics, which are more or less equivalent to other criteria. And loss of information in chaos, for example, no loss of information in the robust dynamics of periodic development. And I think that is also a link to music, because music is in some sense the sound dynamics and this dynamics of information. And I mentioned the brain and cognitive science, and I think that would be a chance, this bridge with information dynamics, also to consider perhaps what is going on in the human brain if they have these aesthetic experiences. But that is a cautious speculation, and I think we could do a lot of research in the future in that direction.
Yeah, I would tell Dilibat, who is an excellent physicist, that he views fractals that way geometrically, and that's what they are. I say that fractals and chaos are the sides of the same coin. In other words, if we take the chaotic behavior of the simple logistic equation, and you see chaos and chaos, and then I show you a tree, which is the tree of bifurcations, leading us to chaos. One is static, just a tree, but it's a tree of fractal bifurcations, geometry. And on the other side, it's chaos, exponential deviation of trajectories. So they're not the same, but they are, I would say, sides of the same coin. That's the way I would describe it.
They are equivalent, yeah.
So wonderful. We cannot stop listening to your communications. I would like to answer Jeanne Artemis. She asked which piece was mentioned as one recorded by Anne-Sophie Mutter. This is a concert of violin and an orchestra by Dulinas. So BOUNTIS ANASTASIOS spoke about.
That's the one I know.
Yeah.
Now I appreciate it much more. Now I understand it better.
I just discovered in the chat. Yeah. Good. Both speakers eloquent in putting their work forward, stimulating referencing. Harry Patch, Bob Gilmore, Howard Skempton, Patch, Chrome, Load, and microtonal scales, genesis of music. Yeah. So it's so fascinating. We cannot, as I told you, stop. Ioannis.
Yes, okay. I can
Please.
see that this is a work in progress, I could say. And we need much more information and tools and knowledge, in order to define finally, the apparently ugliness or beauty or relating that to terms that we invent, like entropy and complexity, or cognitive science, etc. This is a work in progress, and this is the aim and the goal actually of our as human beings. Okay.
So when is the next time?
This is an enlightening, I think, discussion, and I thank you very much for all of you for being with us. We were almost 60 participants tonight, and for next colloquium is 3rd of December. So thank you very much from Violeta and me and Violeta, and see you hopefully in our next colloquium. Thank you.
All the best for you, and thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
See you next time. See you next time.
Have a nice weekend.
Bye-bye.
See you next time. Thank you.